I'm Logan Crawford, and right now on the Spotlight Network, we're diving into the principles of transformational leadership with Dr. Isaac Ojutalayo, author of Understanding the Principles of Church Growth. This is a groundbreaking book that is a must-read for leaders seeking to inspire growth, excellence, and lasting impact within their church or organization. Whether you're a pastor, a lay leader, or simply passionate about effective leadership, this book reveals proven strategies for success that can change your life and change your community. We're delighted to have this wonderful author join us here today on Spotlight. We thank the team at Books to Life Marketing for helping us put him in the spotlight today. And we ask viewers like you to support authors like him by subscribing to our channel and by purchasing his powerful book. The links are below this interview. Doctor, thank you so much for joining me here today on Spotlight.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
It's my pleasure. Tell us a little bit about your inspiration behind writing this book, Understanding the Principles of Church Growth.
Thank you. Over the years, I've been looking into the principles of church growth. I began my theological education 24 years ago. And one of the areas that I really want to look into is the principles of church growth. And the reason for that is that I observed that there is a virtual illiteracy about church growth. And over the years, I've focused on the theological importance of church growth rather than the historical perspective of the church. So it's just an area that I believe that if I'm able to get things right, pastors, teachers, and scholars that are interested in church growth will be able to benefit from my publication, and hence my publication to date. Yeah.
Absolutely. What do you feel is the biggest leadership crisis that churches face today?
Well, the biggest crisis the church is facing today is that we do not have leaders who understand how to understand. Only a handful of leaders understand how to understand. We need leaders who are able to grapple and grok. We need leaders who are able to lead from an angle of motivation, not from an angle of pressure. But one of the challenges, again, is that if you are not qualified in a field, it's very difficult for you to exercise your calling in that field. So some leaders are self-called, self-styled leaders. So I really focused on them that as leaders, you must be very conversant with what you are doing if you are going to lead a church, if you are going to ensure that you have a church that is lively, if you're going to ensure that you have a church that is not a dying church. So leaders are constantly reinventing themselves to ensure that the church is focusing passionately on the ministry and the principles of church growth. But one of the key points, again, is when you have the leaders that are so fearful of what the future holds, there is also a danger in that as well. Any organization that is not dynamic can never lead comfortably. So as a leader, you must be dynamic. So without you not being dynamic, you cannot function effectively within the church body. So these are some of the challenges that the leaders have: the fear of the unknown, and care has to be taken because the congregation look up to you in terms of direction.
Absolutely. Yeah. Adaptability is key as well. Talk to us a little bit about what it means to be a transformational leader.
To be a transformational leader, you must try as much as possible to look at the world in context. Whatever is going on in the world, does it affect the church? I give you an example. The 17th of November 2022, I was privileged to be invited by Premier Radio to the House of Lords at the Attlee Room to discuss about the issue of COVID in the United Kingdom. And one of the key points I took away from that discussion is that as transformational leader, as Peter Carey is no longer with us now, and Kevin Bennett is still with us, is now the chief executive of Premier Radio. Now, during the COVID, you will discover that some churches were closed. There was no services all over the place. And one thing I learned from one of my mentors in America, Dr. MacArthur, during the COVID, he stood his ground. He laid out some wonderful principles that each church should follow. And I looked into that as a scholar as well, that here we are, following someone who's laid down a very good foundation. But what I want to say that during the COVID era, we find that a lot of people couldn't go into the churches. They were serving God from home. And church need to adapt to new technology as well. So here we are, something happened unknown to us. We don't know how to manage it, and yet we need to bring people together in serving God. So the adaptation to the new system is what some churches look into. So that is part of the dynamic procedure of a church, ensuring that the church functions effectively. Yeah.
Absolutely. And Jesus Christ actually is the ultimate model for leadership, correct?
Absolutely, he is. Because you cannot benchmark your life on anyone. Jesus is the standard of all model for Christians. Even though I was reading this morning before this interview that I was looking at the life of Moses, the life of Gideon, the life of Samuel, how God managed to get their attention while they were running away from God, even Jonah. So you cannot benchmark your life of anyone rather than our Lord Jesus Christ. So Jesus is a perfect example for us as Christians to benchmark our lives on.
And his leadership has lasted for more than 2,000 years, which is testament to his great and profound effect on the world. Still
Absolutely.
the central figure of civilization, the Lord Jesus
Absolutely.
Christ. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Talk to us a little
Absolutely.
bit about how small congregations can implement the strategies that you outline in your book.
Well, for small my publication, whether big or small, I believe that what I've written would be of help to them. Any organization that needs to be dynamic, as I said earlier on, regarding church growth, you have to ensure that the minister in charge is responsible for the church growth. And what happens is when the minister in charge is responsible for the church growth, he will motivate others to function effectively. And again, it is not, there is no one area that fits it all. So when it comes to church growth and church development, I normally advise church leaders to make sure that everyone is involved in the church growth development. The leadership have their part to play, and likewise, the entire congregation as well must assist the leadership in achieving their aims and objectives. But when you set up a church, you don't really believe, you can't, you need to have a system in place. But at the same time, what is being put in place needs time and patience for whatever they are going to do to ensure that it's well established. So when you plant a church, you need to wait for about 2-3 years and so on and so forth before you see the fruit of whatever you have sowed. So Jesus even said in his in Genesis 17, when you plant, there is a time for us to reap. So you need to wait, you need to nurture the congregation, and you need to come up with wonderful ideas to keep your congregation together, ensuring that you do not overtax them with so many programs, because sometimes some churches, they overload their congregation with programs, and that becomes very boring and cumbersome for the congregation. So that has to be well managed. Very, very important. Yeah.
Has the role of the church changed since COVID? We saw a lot of remote church happen during COVID. We saw people sometimes leaving the church because of COVID. Many have not returned. So post-COVID church growth is a true struggle, correct?
Absolutely right. And the reason for that is, you see, the Zoom has changed the dynamics. But on the other hand, it's got the advantages and the disadvantages as well. I, as an individual, I like to go to church, meet my colleagues, have a word with them, we interact. But for the elderly, for people that are vulnerable, they can join through Zoom, They can join through conference call. So there are both advantages and disadvantages. At the same time, it is the responsibility of the leadership as well to ensure that he, visits those that are vulnerable, people that can make it to the church hall. So we have a huge responsibility. Post-COVID has changed the dynamics of the church. And I've actually monitored some churches where the congregation has gone down, but the number of followers on Zoom is over 3,000 to 4,000. So it's quite interesting how the dynamics during post-COVID has changed. So there are some areas that are highly effective, and there are some areas the church needs to look into to make membership meaningful as well.
Exactly. Zoom has allowed you to exponentially really grow your congregation and your following. Only X number of people fit into a church, but limitless people fit into a Zoom conference call or
That's
a
correct.
feed. But getting those congregants who are remote engaged, to get them to tithe, to get them to participate in activities, that's the challenge, right?
Absolutely right. Because for me, sometimes, well, as a lecturer as well, I don't like Zoom lecturing at all because I'm a little bit old-fashioned. I like to speak to my students. I like to interact. But at the same time, the convenience in, lecturing from London to different parts of the world, that made things easy as well. But it will be very difficult to get them involved in some activities within the church, but only those that are present in the church will be really, really helpful. So how do you interact with someone that you haven't seen for 6, 7 months, but he or she attends the Zoom prayer meetings and so on and so forth, just for an hour or half an hour? So there is no proper engagement when you look into that. So that is just one of the key challenges we have in ministry for now.
Absolutely. As they say, it's the best of times and the worst of times. Technology is what you make of it. It can be a useful tool to keep people connected to the church. Some aren't physically capable to go, and this
Absolutely.
keeps them involved and invested in the ministry. Doctor, before we leave you today, anything else you'd like the folks at home to know, either about your ministry or about your book or about effective church leadership and church growth?
Right. What I will say is for leaders that just about to ensure this commence the ministry, my advice to them is to ensure that they have a good mentor before going into ministry, because you go into ministry without a good mentor, you are likely not to perform effectively when you get into your ministry. And on the other hand, again, I want to seize this opportunity again to thank those that have supported me in my ministry. I'm not a church leader. I'm just an academic. I publish books, but I want to appreciate one of my professors. He's no longer with us as well, Professor Millward, Raymond Millward. And also I have a wonderful professor who edited my publication, Professor C.L. Ryan, and my colleagues. Most of them are doctors of ministry, Professor Powell, Dr. Richard, Michael, Frederick, Theophilos, you name it, they are endless. And my wonderful wife, Juliet, and my children, Christopher and Debbie, and my younger brother, Folo, and a wonderful sister, Juliana. They have been very, very supportive in my ministry. And, what cannot express my gratitude to them all for their assistance while I during my publication. Yeah,
Exactly. Behind every great person, behind every great writer, behind every great leader is a support network, family,
absolutely right.
friends, community,
Yes.
mentors. And we appreciate your shout out to them today, as I'm sure they do as well. Doctor, thank you so much for joining me here today on Spotlight.
I'm very grateful. Thank you for having me. Thank you so much.
Grateful to have you on the show, sir. To the folks at home, I'm Logan Crawford, thanking you for your time this time. Until next time on Spotlight. And don't forget to pick up a copy of this wonderful book. It is called Understanding the Principles of Church Growth. It is a groundbreaking book that is a must read for leaders seeking to inspire growth, excellence, and lasting impact within their church or organization. I'm Logan Crawford. Until next time.